Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today and to share part of my research and my study with you all. My presentation today continues and completes the work that I performed and presented together with Professor Peter Manuel in our first Fandanguero Congress. Closer, right? Maybe like this. Okay. So this conference focuses mainly in Malagueñas and Zapateados, and once again I insist in talking about Rondeñas. But Rondeñas and Malagueñas are sibling genres and sibling palos. This case study and its methodology not only may be in line with other works focused on Malagueñas, but also may inspire new researching. So our paper in 2015 shed new light on the evolution of flamenco guitar playing from the analysis of the rondeña performed by the vernacular Granadino guitarist Francisco Rodríguez Murciano, El Murciano. In that work, we presented two previously unexamined variant transcriptions of Francisco Rodríguez Murciano's Rondeña. The first one, here you can see it, found in the personal musical library of Princess Isabel de Bourbon, who is the central figure of my PhD. And the second one, located in a book of 1851 entitled Letters and Documents of Glinka, which contains a photographic reproduction of a transcription of Murciano's Rondeña that the Russian composer noted in 1845 during his stay in Granada. Through the study of these two new transcriptions, we were able to establish, among other things, that some guitar techniques and flamenco forms were able to establish among, whose development had been circumscribed to the circles of the classical guitarists of the late 19th century already existed in the repertoire of flamenco guitar, at least from the first half of the 19th century, and among vernacular and folkloric guitarists as Murciano himself. So after this first contribution, I have been able to locate new variations of Murciano's Rondeña, which have allowed me to trace its influence in other later compositions for guitar inscribed in the field of classical music, and therefore to glimpse the process of restoration of the 19th century Rondeña and its own musical diaspora from the traditional music repertoire to the classical music one. So this musical diaspora happened mainly through two courses: the restored musical memory of high-row Andalusian musicians, such as the classical guitarist Julián Arcas, and the proliferation of handwritten musical copies of authentic folkloric documents, which permitted its analysis and musical reelaboration by other well-educated Andalusian composers, musicians, such as Ángel Barrios and Manuel de Falla. These two processes helped to restore the 19th century Rondeña sonority and specificity characterized by el toque por arriba tonality based on E Phrygian major in 3/4 meter, a basic filler riff of bass thumb, E major, B major, E minor, E major, B major, E minor patterns with E major arpeggios, other Bourdon type bass thumb melodies decorated by constant E major and E dominant 7th arpeggios, and interjected passages of picado mixed with legato effects executed by left hand hammering on and pulling off. So regarding the first process of restoration of the musical memory of the 19th century Rondeña, whose earliest antecedent is the one by Murciano, the earliest that we know so far, I must start speaking of the Rondeña para guitarra sola, Rondeña for solo guitar by the classical guitarist Julián Arcas. And in the presentation of our work, scholars had focused on the conspicuous similarities between Murciano's Rondeña and this piece. Certainly, both Rondeñas reveal many features in common with each other and also with modern style of playing Malagueña. I will briefly pause now to play several sections of both Rondeñas, which are certainly very illuminating of what I'm saying. These are passages, falsettas that sound the same in one and another Rondeña. And also it will give you an idea or how the 19th century Rondeña sounds. I'm going to start with the Rondeña by Murciano, and I'm going to alternate its falsettas with the ones by Arcas. Let's start. with the second one. Oops. And the last one. So from its analytical and comparative study and its contextualization, we can assume that Arcas reproduced the sonority of the 19th century Rondeña in his piece. It is very probable that the tradition of the 19th century Rondeña was one of the most recognized and restored of the Andalusian repertoire. There is no evidence that Arcas knew Murciano in person, or if he obtained a musical copy of any of the variations of his Rondeña. I still need to check his personal library, but other researchers have shared with me that they have not found any copy of Murciano's Rondeña among his documents, personal documents. But we can consider that there was, at least in the area of Eastern Andalusia, and Almería and Granada are adjacent provinces, a collective musical memory of the Rondeña, its falsettas and its sonority. We can therefore assure that Julián Arcas knew the tradition of the 19th century Rondeña for guitar, which he restored and reworked in his Rondeña para guitarra sola. This hypothesis is backed by the press advertisements of the time. In September of 1842, for example, a Madrid newspaper featured an ad for guitar lessons offered by a young disciple of Murciano, and now I quote, author of the genuine Rondeñas Granadinas, Granada-style Rondeñas, celebrated for their variaciones and never heard in the court. And later, in 1859, Juan José Pérez placed a similar note in a Seville newspaper offering guitar lessons which could include Murciano's Malagueña, presumably referring to his Rondeñas. The 19th century Rondeña was part of the musical memory of the Andalusian guitarists of the time, as well as the musical memory of Arcas. And this one restored it in its compositions of Andalusian airs. So all this allows, in my opinion, to define the figure of Julián Arcas not as the father of flamenco guitar, as many have said, but as a nationalist composer who, like other musicians of the first Spanish musical nationalism, used the authentic folkloric document, in this case Murciano's Rondeña, as a base inspiration for his own compositions, more refined, elaborate, and complex. So as we see, flamenco musical repertoire, whose restored behaviors were rooted in caves, in patios, in the humblest houses, in barber shops, in the tablaos of many café conciertos, underwent an expansive process with the arrival of musical nationalism in Spain, the exaltation of popular music, and the need to crystallize a sound identity of the Spanish. Continuing with the restoration of the 19th century Rondeña for solo guitar playing, the truth is that at the end of the 19th century and the first years of the 20th, we lose its trace in documentary terms, as we cannot find sources after the 1870s. It is not possible to know if flamenco guitarists continue playing this 19th century Rondeña, and the fact is that it wouldn't be until 1930 when the Rondeña for solo guitar playing reappears in the flamenco repertoire with the composition by Ramón Montoya, whose Rondeña has very little to do with the ones by Murciano and Arcas. However, as I pointed out at the beginning of my presentation, the finding of new transcriptions of different versions of Murciano's Rondeña allows us to establish how the musical memory of the 19th century Rondeña was restored in compositions belonging fully to the 20th century music repertoire, thanks mostly to the proliferation of the musical copies of the variations of Murciano's Rondeña. At the time, I guess that in the absence of photocopiers, handwritten musical copies were circulated among musicians who sought to inspiration in traditional music, like Manuel de Falla. So 19th century Rondeña played a fundamental role and a great impact in the work of Falla, fascinated by the guitarist language in its flamenco manifestations and its elaboration and use in classical music. My research establishes that Falla recreated the technique and idiomatic sonority of the 19th century Rondeña for guitar in a great number of his compositions from diverse sources, among them and fundamentally from both Rondeñas by El Murciano and Arcas. So Manuel de Falla conserved among his musical documents the Rondeña para guitarra sola by Arcas, a score he had acquired in his Parisian period between 1904 and 1907 and 1914. But also he kept his among his most prized musical documents up to 4 different handwritten transcriptions of Murciano's Rondeña, indicating that this was a work of great interest to him, very influential in his composition. Some researchers said that the only Rondeña that Manuel de Falla conserved in his personal archive was the one by Arcas. But I was very lucky. I went like a few months ago to Granada and I could find new Rondeñas by El Murciano. So we see 3 of them in the images. The first one on the left here, this is the same transcription of the Rondeña de Granada, the same one that is preserved in the Princess Isabel personal library, and the one that I unearthed in 2015, which contains notes on the techniques of flamenco guitar, such as rasgueo or punteo by Manuel de Falla. And 2 new transcriptions, these ones that you see here on the right, unknown so far, so this is new, under the title Variaciones de Rondeñas compuestas por Don Francisco Rodríguez Murciano, Rondeña Variations composed by Don Francisco Rodríguez Murciano, which I found some months ago, as I already said. It was probably also a musician from Granada, Ángel Barrios, a friend of Falla, who provided him with all these transcriptions right after he settled in Granada. Ángel Barrios' father, the guitarist Antonio Barrios, personally knew Murciano's son Malipieri, who was his guitar teacher. And this is the connection between Murciano and Falla. So here in this picture that I found in Ángel Barrios' archive, we can see Malipieri, who is Murciano's son, and who was the one who transcribed all his father's variations of Rondeña. And here, holding a guitar with the mustache, is Antonio Barrios, who was the owner of a tavern in La Alhambra. It was in the same area of La Alhambra, up in the city, and he was his disciple. And here, this young man holding a violin is Ángel Barrios, who is the musician who met Manuel de Falla in Paris, and who helped him to settle in Granada in 1907. So this is the connection between Malipieri Murciano and Manuel de Falla. In fact, Ángel Barrios himself restored part of the 19th century Rondeña in his piece for solo guitar, El Pregón de las Flores, where he reproduces its idiomatic elements. But I'd rather prefer to dedicate the last minutes of my talk to the restoration of the 19th century Rondeña for guitar tradition by Falla. So my research suggests that Falla used the guitar resources of the 19th century Rondeña in his composition Le Tombeau de Claude Debussy. His only solo guitar work composed in 1920, dedicated to the memory of the French composer who died in 1918. In this piece, he mainly used musical motifs of La Soirée dans Granada by Debussy. This work, which was one of his earliest compositions in Granada, has been the object of some studies that have recognized in it very explicit elements of flamenco, although none of them has linked it directly with the 19th century Rondeña. So a close look at this work allows us to record recognizable and explicit elements of it, as if Falla intentionally had included an honorable musical wink to the city of Granada, including musical material of the Rondeña by Murciano, which this guitarist used to perform in the Albaicín, this white neighborhood facing La Alhambra. So I'm going to concrete now these explicit elements. Le Tombeau de Claude Debussy has a ternary musical form, ABA. Often, this work has been associated with some tonal harmonic ambiguity by the alternate use of F and F sharp, C and C sharp, or B flat notes. And like Murciano and Arcas Rondeñas, the composition of Falla revolves around a modal center, E Phrygian. On the one hand, the main theme set out in the first two bars always ends up with a brief pattern in the style of the harmonic pattern of two arpeggio bars in Murciano's Rondeña. This one, the E major, B major, E minor, E major, B major, E minor pattern, resulting a constant in the Bourdon. And in other words, in part A, Falla uses the main theme, combining it with different melodic materials extracted from La Soledad and Granada, always with a recurring rhythm and bounded by the arpeggiated cinquillo. As in Murciano's Rondeña, the arpeggiated pattern limits the different falsettas. We can see this pattern in La Soledad de Granada here. I circle it so that you can see. In the central part, B, or development, high point of the score, Manuel de Falla explicitly uses elements of the 19th century Rondeña which can be auditively recognized. From its analysis, we identify the arpeggiated treatment of chords in E major with melody in the Bourdon, followed by an arpeggiated cinquillo that introduces a passage of a scale transition for the left hand, similar to the passage for the left hand in Murciano's Rondeña de Granada, as you can see in examples 1A and 1B. And this passage in Falla's piece is followed by 4 bars with arpeggios in E major and melody in the Bourdon, like in Murciano's Rondeña. The central part B of Le Tombeau de Claude Debussy ends up with 2 bars almost identical to bars 111 and 112 and bars 141, 147 of Murciano's Rondeña de Granada, as you can see in examples 2A and 2B. Using a metaphorical image, we could say that Falla placed the essence of the 19th century Rondeña right in the heart of Le Tombeau. Let's listen this central part of part B of Le Tombeau de Claude Debussy. Let's see if you can recognize some of the 19th century Rondeña. It is. This is still part A. Here it returns slowly to part A again, to Les Soirées d'Engrenade de Claude Debussy. And now it's already part A. Oops. So some authors maintain that the origin of the toque de Rondeña does not depend so directly on what El Murciano did in the first half of the 19th century and later Julián Arcas in 1860, but indeed in the 20th century creation by Ramón Montoya. As a conclusion, my study argues that the origin of the toque solo de Rondeña goes back at least to the first half of the 19th century, and throughout that century continued to grow and consolidate as the solo guitar toque par excellence among flamenco guitarists. This tradition of the 19th century Rondeña and its guitar language influenced, in addition, the compositions of many cultivated composers of the 20th century, among others Manuel de Falla. Le Tombeau de Claude Debussy is the last piece of a sort of relaboración en cascada, cascade process. Can you understand that? Relaboración en cascada, cascading process, okay, that began let's try to explain it. That began with the popular rondeña of guitarist Rodríguez de Murciano, continued with the restoration of rondeña for solo guitar by classical guitarist Julián Arcas, and ended with the reworking of falla of the most identifiable musical material, with the essence of the fundamental element, as Falla used to say, of the 19th century rondeña. And this entire phenomenon could happen thanks to the restored musical memory of the Andalusian guitarists and the proliferation of the handwritten musical copies that spread out in time and space this musical tradition. Thank you. Gracias. Yeah?
So this is very interesting. In listening to this, what I hear on the guitar is essentially what in abandonado forms in flamenco you find as the anticopla. And what I don't hear is the copla, which is the major key portion. And there's a palo rondeña that lots of people have sung, and I believe that there's pretty long historical record of that going down back to the 19th century, or at least to the early 20th century, which has this alternation between the major key and then resolving into through the Andalusian cadence. Did Murciano have any major key kind of copla part?
Yeah. All the variations that I found have the copla. Sometimes it's intercalate between the falsetas, and the one that I found in the Princess Isabel personal library, the copla is completely apart at the end after a double bar, but still it's there. So yeah, you can follow the. I mean, there is like a change in the status of the copla with arcas, because these are not anymore coplas to be sung, but instrumental coplas. You cannot sing on them. And after that, we have the rondeña by Montoya, who doesn't have any copla at all. Yeah.
But is the copla the same major key copla that people sing in the other?
Yes, it's the same. It follows the same structure, harmonic structure, the same one as the fandangos. Yeah. Yeah. Please.
I was intrigued, of course, also how Falla comes home via the French composer Debussy, who had so little physical contact with Spain, but of course spiritually was perhaps Spanish. But I'm wondering if you've done any research or have any speculation about the exposure of Parisian audiences in the 19th century to Murciano's Rondeña, if it's possible.
Oh, that would be great to find that. But the thing is that I really think that Falla, well, it could have happened through Ángel Barrios, who was in Paris, but I have not studied his career, though it's very interesting. There are some researchers who have done so in Granada. I was going to say a name. I will remind it later. But the thing is that Falla, I think he knew this tradition, the 19th century rondeña tradition, after arriving in Granada, after his Parisian state or period. So I don't know if they were exposed to it. But Ángel Barrios used to play in the trio, it was called Trio Albéniz, and they used to perform Albéniz plays, and of course he had known himself Murciano, so maybe somewhere in Paris someone heard Murciano's rondeña, but I don't have any recall about that. Yeah.
The most famous rondeña, concert rondeña, classical piece based on the rondeña, is clearly Albéniz's rondeña from the Iberia collection. And I'm so grateful to you for this report today, because 18 years ago, when I was putting the finishing touches on my biography of Albéniz and I was talking about Iberia, I said, this is called rondeña, but most people today are used to the Montoya version, won't recognize this as a rondeña. But this is, in fact, was typical. The 19th century rondeña was very similar to the Malagueña, and had a more regular meter and predictable chord progressions and so on. So I'm very grateful. This is a fascinating development. The problem is that occasionally doesn't seem to be much of a difference between a Rondeña and a Malagueña and maybe even the older Granadina.
Yeah.
So how would you articulate those
Oof.
differences?
So I'm trying like to restore the evolution of Rondeña. I'm still on the process, but so far what I can say is that maybe what Malagueña is for, I don't know how to express it in English, I think. What Malagueña is for I mean, what is el cante for Malagueña is like the guitar for Rondeña. So maybe there is this difference, yeah, because they are
Difference is the
basically, maybe.
One emphasizes voice, the
Yeah.
other emphasizes
Yeah.
guitar.
Maybe when the singer was the protagonist, then they decided to perform the Malagueña, and when the guitarist was the protagonist, then it was the Rondeña. Because the cante in Rondeña is very like rhythmic, light, much more.
Secondary.
Yeah.
So you know Albéniz Rondeña, right?
Yeah.
And
Though
when
I've
you
not
hear it,
studied it.
what do you think? Do you think Rondeña a la Murciana?
I need to hear more that piece to make connections. But yeah, I hear. Of course, I hear more 19th century Rondeña than the Montoya's one. Yeah. So yeah, very good point. Yeah.
Talking about connections, does this 19th century Rondeña have something to do with the soleá also? Because I
Yeah.
can hear like
Yeah, in our
soleá.
in the first Fandanguero Congress, Guillermo Castro said exactly the same comment. Like what I'm hearing is a soleá here. So yeah, we still need like to do a huge work to classify and to see the evolution of different palos and its connections among them.
But
So
it was called Rondeña at that time, it became later on soleá.
yeah,
I mean, it sounds
to you,
as a
yeah.
musician, I
So
can
you're
hear
the second person who say that, yeah. Let's continue listening and classifying. Let's see. Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks. Gracias.